We're going to learn Perek Aleph Mishnah Dalid. This Mishnah has 3 parts. As an introduction, in this Mishnah we will learn that an item must have 3 conditions for it to be considered kosher schach. Condition number 1 is that it must grow from the ground. Condition number 2 is that it must be disconnected from the ground. Condition number 3 is that it must be an item that is not able to become tameh. And as a general rule, any raw material like wood or branches or a bamboo stick is something that is not able to become tameh. We are also going to learn in this Mishnah that if you have a mixture of kosher schach mixed together with non-kosher schach, if the kosher schach is the majority, then the non-kosher schach becomes nullified and the sukkah is then considered to be kosher. So says the first part of the Mishnah that if a person is building a sukkah and next to his sukkah he has a grapevine or a squash vine or an ivy that's growing, and he lifts up the vine or ivy and places it on his sukkah, and then on top of the vines or ivy he places an additional layer of kosher schach, says the Mishnah that this sukkah is pasul, because the vines and ivy are still connected to the ground and they are not considered to be kosher schach. However, says the second part of the Mishnah, that there are 2 ways for this sukkah to become kosher. The first way is that if the top layer of schach is more than the bottom layer of vines or ivy, and the top layer gets mixed into the bottom layer, then the vines and ivy become nullified, and this sukkah is now kosher. The second way for the sukkah to become kosher is that if a person cuts the vines or ivy, and then he lifts up the vines and ivy and places it back on the sukkah, then it's considered to be kosher schach, and this sukkah is now kosher. And says the third part of the Mishnah that if a person uses an item that could become tameh, even though it grows from the ground, like if he takes a piece of wood that was made into a vessel, which can now become tameh, then that is considered non-kosher schach. And so too, if a person uses an item that cannot become tameh, but it didn't grow from the ground, for example, metal, then that cannot be used as kosher schach. Only if you have something that is not able to become tameh, and it grew from the ground, and like we learned in the second part of the Mishnah, it's disconnected from the ground, then that item is considered kosher schach. We are now going to read the Mishnah inside. Says the first part of the Mishnah, Hidla, if he raised, Aleha, on it, on the sukkah, Es hagefen, a grapevine, Ve'esa delas, or a squash vine, Ve'esa kisem, or ivy, and Ve'sikech, and he put kosher schach al gaba, on top of it, Pisula, this sukkah is pasul. Says the second part of the Mishnah, but there are 2 ways that the sukkah will be kosher. Number 1, Ve'im, and if haya sikuch, the kosher schach was harbe more mehen than them, then the vines or the ivy that are beneath it, and they are mixed together. The second way, or sheket satzon, if he cut them, the vines and the ivy, and he lifts it up and places it back down, then kishera, the sukkah is now kosher. The third part of the Mishnah, zeh haklal, this is the rule. Call anything, shahu, that it, mekabel tuma, can become tameh, like for example a piece of wood that was made into a vessel, or ve'ein giduloi, it does not grow min haaretz, from the ground, like for example metal, then ein misakrin bai, we may not use it for schach. But v'chol davar, anything, she'enoi, that does not, mekabel tuma, become tameh. And vigiduloi, it grows min haaretz, from the ground. And like we learned in the second part of the Mishnah, it is disconnected from the ground. Then misakrim bai, we may use it for schach.